There is no need for mandatory vaccination against COVID-19 at this time in the Commonwealth Caribbean countries. This is the view of regional health and legal experts during a recent virtual panel discussion on the subject of mandatory vaccination in the Caribbean. Dr. Peter Figueroa, epidemiologist from the University of the West Indies, Mona, said there may be need for mandatory vaccination for some sectors of the society if the pandemic worsens, but not right now.
I think it's too early to be talking about mandatory vaccination for COVID, but let's say the variants really begin to cause a lot of trouble and health workers are falling down because they are getting sicker as well. Then the question arises, I don't know whether it was Professor Antwine or Dr. Barnett who said it, there are policies in hospitals in the US and elsewhere where health providers have to be vaccinated with some of the established vaccines. All our medical students have to be vaccinated fully, included from hepatitis B and this sort of thing, not yet influenza. But even now we're thinking, should we not require health providers to be vaccinated? So we have to always put these things in context.
Meanwhile, looking at the legality of mandatory vaccinations in the Caribbean, Professor Rose-Marie Bell-Antwine, labor law specialist, is suggesting providing choices to persons rather than mandating vaccination, as is the case with some vaccines, such as the yellow fever vaccine. She said constitutionality will influence the question of reasonableness of COVID-19 measures taken, including vaccination.
The legal approach can be passive or it can be indirect. It can be soft law. And this happens even before COVID. It's often de facto. So, for example, there's no law that says you must take a yellow fever vaccine. But we know that if you want to fly to many places in the world, and certainly if you're from Trinidad, then you can't go anywhere without it. So no one forces you to do it, but if you don't, well, you can't do what you want. And a similar situation is already happening with the COVID vaccine and the airlines. Just this week, Cal said that you can't fly if you have not been vaccinated, if you're a non-national. No one bats an eyelid. There is an illusion of choice. That approach actually has worked with courts before. For example, in Europe and the UK, in terms of preventing persons wearing their hijab at workplaces, the court said, well, you're not forced. You have a choice. You can work somewhere else. And that kind of thinking is already emerging in terms of COVID. In the first case that came up in Texas, the case of Bridges and the Methodist Hospital. And the court said, well, the vaccine was not coercion, since the Methodist Hospital, quote, was in the business of saving lives without giving them the COVID-19 virus. It is a choice made to keep starved patients and their families safer. Bridges could freely choose to accept or refuse the vaccine. However, if she refuses, she will simply need to work somewhere else.
The panel discussion was streamed live on YouTube and Facebook and was broadcast on some local media outlets. Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.